The first thing Sergeant Cole Mercer noticed about the man in the grey hoodie was how calmly he stood beneath the street lamp. Not nervous, not hurried, not looking for an escape. Just still. That should have told Mercer something. Instead, it made him angry. The wind coming off the bay moved through Harbour Crest in cold, restless gusts, bending the branches of carefully trimmed trees and pushing dry leaves along the curb. The neighborhood sat on the western edge of San Francisco, a quiet collection of renovated townhouses, narrow gardens and expensive cars tucked behind clean garage doors. At 9:17 on a Wednesday night, most windows glowed blue from televisions. The sidewalks were nearly empty. Adrian Villanueva had walked those blocks many times before. He was 39, Filipino-American, born in California to parents who had come from the Philippines with 2 suitcases, a folder of immigration papers, and a stubborn belief that hard work could make a place feel like home. He had grown up in Daly City, in a small stucco house where shoes stayed by the door. Rice was always warm somewhere in the kitchen, and his father could repair almost anything with a screwdriver and patience. Tonight, Adrian was leaving his mother's house after dinner. He wore jeans, running shoes, and an old grey hoodie that had survived law school, 2 clerkships, 3 apartments, and more late nights than he could count. In his backpack were a tablet, a folder his mother had asked him to review, and a small container of pancit she had insisted he take home, even after he told her he had enough food for the week. On his left wrist was his father's watch, a modest Seiko with a brushed steel band, worn smooth at the edges. It was not rare. It was not expensive. Adrian owned watches worth more, but none mattered as much. On the back, in letters so small they were almost invisible unless the light caught them, Ramon Villanueva had engraved 4 words before giving it to his son. Remember where you came from. Adrian had been thinking about those words when the patrol car slowed beside him. The vehicle rolled forward another 20 feet, stopped, then reversed. Inside, Mercer watched Adrian through the passenger side window. His partner, Officer Evan Doyle, glanced up from the incident log on the dashboard. Something wrong? Mercer did not answer immediately. He looked at the hoodie, the backpack, the quiet street. Let's talk to him. Doyle looked through the windshield. About what? We'll find out. Mercer stepped out before Doyle could respond. Adrian heard the door close behind him. Sir. He turned. Evening, Adrian said. Mercer stopped several feet away. What are you doing out here? Walking home. You live here. Not in this neighborhood. Then where are you coming from? My mother's house. Where's that? Adrian gave the street name. Mercer studied him. You have identification? Adrian paused. Am I being detained? Doyle's head lifted slightly. Mercer smiled without warmth. I asked if you have identification. I do. I'm asking whether I'm required to provide it. That was the moment the encounter shifted. Hands where I can see them, Mercer said. Adrian kept his hands visible. They're right here. Turn around. For what reason? Turn around. Then he turned. Mercer patted down the outside of his hoodie and jeans. The search was quick at first, then oddly thorough. He removed Adrian's wallet, opened it, and looked through the contents. Adrian Villanueva, Mercer read. Daly City. Yes. Mercer looked at a bank card, then another. What do you do? Is that relevant? Mercer glanced at Doyle. Everything is relevant when I'm asking questions. Doyle said nothing. Mercer opened the backpack. That's personal property, Adrian said, and now it's part of the stop. He pulled out the tablet, the folder, the food container, and a small envelope of cash his mother had given him to deposit. Mercer counted it. Quite a bit of cash. It belongs to my mother. Of course it does. Adrian looked at him. Put it back. For the first time, Doyle spoke. Sergeant, maybe we should call this in. Mercer ignored him. His attention had moved to Adrian's wrist. Watch. Adrian's hand instinctively closed over it. Mercer noticed. Take it off. No. You want to make this difficult? I want you to explain why you're... Taking my property. Mercer stepped closer. He reached for Adrian's wrist and unfastened the watch himself. There was no struggle. Adrian simply stared at him while the steel band opened and the familiar weight disappeared from his arm. Mercer turned the watch over in his palm. "This really yours?" Adrian's face changed. "Not much, but enough." "It was my father's." Mercer slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Then you can explain that later." "You're logging it as evidence?" Doyle looked at Mercer again. Mercer said, "We're taking what we need to verify." "Then give me the property receipt." Silence. Adrian looked down at Doyle's body camera. A small indicator light was still on. Mercer followed his gaze. Then he looked at Doyle. It was no more than a glance. Doyle hesitated. His hand rose to his chest. The light went dark. Adrian saw everything. He also saw the exact time reflected on the illuminated dashboard inside the patrol car. 9:23. Mercer returned the wallet but kept the cash. He kept the watch. He zipped the backpack and pushed it against Adrian's chest. "Go home," he said, "and don't turn a simple street contact into something bigger than it is." Adrian held the backpack. "I'm going to report this." Doyle's eyes dropped. Mercer's voice became quieter. "You can report whatever you want. Then there will be reports from us too. Suspicious behavior, refusal to cooperate. Maybe we remember the encounter differently." "You sure you want that headache?" Adrian studied him for several seconds. Mercer mistook the silence for reconsideration. "That's what I thought." He turned toward the patrol car. Adrian spoke behind him. "Sergeant Mercer." Mercer looked back. "You should write down exactly what happened tonight," Adrian said. "While your memory is fresh." Mercer laughed once. "Good advice." The patrol car pulled away less than a minute later. Then he looked at his empty wrist. He did not chase the car. He did not shout. Instead, he took out his phone, opened a blank note, and began typing. 9:17 p.m. Patrol unit approached westbound on Larkspur Avenue. 9:18. Sergeant Cole Mercer initiated contact. 9:23. Officer Evan Doyle deactivated body camera. Property retained without receipt. Cash approximately $600. One Seiko wristwatch, steel band, engraved caseback. Adrian's fingers paused over the screen. He could still hear his father's voice from years earlier, half teasing and half serious, when he had fastened that watch around Adrian's wrist for the first time. "Never forget who you were before anyone learned your title." Adrian looked toward the empty street. Mercer had not asked his occupation again. He had not searched the slim inner pocket of Adrian's backpack, where a courthouse access card rested behind a legal pad. He had not noticed the small black security camera clipped inside the bag's shoulder seam, and he certainly had not recognized the quiet Filipino-American man in the old gray hoodie as the newly appointed federal judge whose name had appeared 3 weeks earlier on a courthouse announcement almost no patrol officer had read. Adrian closed the note. For Adrian Villanueva, it had just become a record. Adrian did not tell his mother what happened that night, not immediately. At 9:52, he unlocked the side door of his townhouse, placed the container of pancit in the refrigerator, and stood for several seconds in the kitchen without turning on the overhead light. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rush of traffic several blocks away. His wrist felt strangely light. That bothered him more than the missing cash. He changed out of the grey hoodie and carried his backpack into the small office at the back of the house. A plain wooden desk faced a wall of books. On one shelf sat a faded photograph of Ramon and Lilia Villanueva outside their first California apartment, both impossibly young and smiling at the future. Adrian sat down. He removed the tiny camera from the inside seam of the backpack. He opened the application. A file appeared. 21 minutes, 43 seconds. He watched it once without pausing. The angle was imperfect. Most of the picture showed the zipper line of his backpack, a slice of pavement, and occasionally the lower half of Mercer's torso. But the audio was clear. Adrian leaned back. He watched it again. This time he took notes. At 9:23:23, Doyle's hand moved toward his chest. The camera in Adrian's backpack did not show the body camera light clearly, but the audio captured Mercer saying, "We're taking what we need to verify," followed by 6 seconds of silence. Adrian created 2 copies of the file. One went to an encrypted drive, one went to cloud storage. The original remained untouched. Then he opened the location history on his phone and exported the coordinates from 9 to 9:40. He photographed the empty place on his wrist where the Seiko had been. He wrote down the serial number from an old insurance inventory, not because the watch had significant market value, but because Ramon had been meticulous about recording serial numbers for everything he owned. "People remember stories," his father had said. "Paper remembers details." Adrian had laughed at the time. Now he opened a new document. He titled it Personal Incident Memorandum. He began with the date. By midnight, he had reconstructed the encounter minute by minute. Only then did he call someone. Chief Judge Evelyn Monroe answered on the 4th ring. "Adrian? I'm sorry it's late. That sentence usually means the next sentence is important." "I had an encounter with 2 officers tonight," Adrian said. There was a pause. "Are you all right?" "Yes." "What kind of encounter?" he told her. Not dramatically, not selectively. He described the stop, the search, the property, the body camera, the warning. He told her about the security recording and the location data. He told her the officers' names. Monroe listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "What are you planning to do?" "File a complaint tomorrow morning, as Judge Villanueva." Adrian looked at the photograph of his parents, as Adrian Villanueva. Another pause. "Good," Monroe said. He was surprised by the speed of her answer. "You agree?" "I agree that the process should not become more responsive merely because the person filing the complaint has chambers on the 7th floor. Adrian rubbed his forehead. "There's a possibility this becomes a criminal matter." "There is." "And a possibility it eventually reaches federal court." "There is. If it reaches our district, then we deal with judicial assignments and conflicts when they exist, not before. You document everything now. You disclose everything later. Do not use your office to steer the investigation." "I wasn't going to." "I know. That's why I'm telling you plainly instead of delicately." Adrian nodded, even though she could not see him. Monroe's voice softened. "Was the watch your father's?" Adrian looked at his bare wrist again. "Yes." "I'm sorry." That was the first moment all night when his composure shifted. Not because she had expressed sympathy, because she understood what the object meant, without needing an explanation. "I'll get it back," he said. "Maybe," Monroe replied. "But make sure you don't turn getting it back into the only thing that matters." After the call, Adrian remained at his desk. At 1:08 in the morning, he finally opened the folder his mother had given him. Inside were old records from Ramon's repair business. Lilia wanted help closing a dormant account that still carried the business name. The papers smelled faintly of cardboard and the cedar cabinet where she had stored them for years. Near the bottom was a photograph Adrian had never seen. Ramon stood behind a counter in 1994, holding a screwdriver in one hand and wearing the Seiko on the other wrist. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows. A handwritten sign behind him read, "Villanueva Electronics. Repairs while you wait." Adrian stared at the photograph for a long time. His father had never been impressed by titles. When Adrian graduated from law school, Ramon had hugged him and said, "Good. Now learn how to be useful." When Adrian became a magistrate, Ramon had asked whether the courthouse cafeteria served decent coffee. When the possibility of a federal appointment first came up, Ramon was already gone. Lilia had cried when Adrian received the confirmation call. Adrian had not. He had simply gone into his office, closed the door, and placed the old Seiko on the desk beside him for the rest of the afternoon. At 2:14 he printed the incident memorandum. At 2:16 he printed still frames from the security video. At 2:20 he placed the copied file on a new flash drive. At 2:24 he created an inventory of the retained property and attached proof of ownership for the watch. At 2:31 he finally went upstairs. He slept for less than 3 hours. By 6:15 he was awake again. His normal routine would have taken him to the courthouse before 8. Instead, he sent a short message to his clerk saying he would arrive late and moved his first conference to the afternoon. Then he dressed in a navy suit. He stood in front of the mirror, fastening his cuff. For a moment he considered wearing the judicial identification badge around his neck. He left it on the dresser. At 7:42, he carried a plain manila envelope to his car. On the front he had written only 4 words: formal complaint, property misconduct. No title, no courthouse letterhead, no mention of his position. Across town, Cole Mercer was finishing a breakfast sandwich inside his patrol car. Adrian's father's watch was in the center console beneath a folded parking citation. Doyle sat beside him, staring through the windshield. "You kept it," Doyle said. Mercer did not look over. "Kept what?" "The watch. Evidence." "We didn't log evidence." Mercer took another bite. "Then maybe stop saying words that make things complicated." Doyle's jaw tightened. "What if he complains?" Mercer finally looked at him. "He won't." "He said he would." "People say a lot of things when they're embarrassed." Mercer closed the center console. "By tonight, he'll have convinced himself it isn't worth the trouble." At almost the same moment, Adrian Villanueva walked through the front doors of the Department of Professional Standards, carrying an envelope thick enough to bend at the edges. He took a number from the dispenser. Then the newly appointed federal judge sat in a plastic chair beneath a flickering fluorescent light and waited his turn like everyone else. The woman behind the intake desk did not recognize Adrian Villanueva. That was exactly what he wanted. Lieutenant Marisol Vega had spent 14 years in professional standards and had learned to distrust first impressions. The man in the navy suit waiting beneath the fluorescent lights seemed prepared rather than angry. He waited quietly until his number was called, approached the desk and said, "I'd like to file a formal complaint involving 2 officers from Harbor Crest Patrol." Vega looked at the envelope in his hand. "Date of incident?" "Last night." "Were you arrested or cited?" "No." "Injured?" "No treatment required." "Property involved?" "Yes." Vega slid an intake form toward him. Adrian filled it out in neat block letters. Name: Adrian Ramon Villanueva. Address: telephone, date and time. Officer names: Sergeant Cole Mercer. Officer Evan Doyle. Vega read the names twice. "You're sure about the sergeant?" Adrian looked up. "Yes." "How?" "His nameplate was visible. His partner addressed him as Mercer once. I also recorded the patrol unit number." He wrote it in the margin. Vega's eyes moved over the form. "What property are you reporting?" $640 in cash and a Seiko wristwatch belonging to my late father. "They told you it was being seized?" "They told me it was being taken to verify. They did not provide a receipt, case number, citation, or evidence reference." Vega leaned back slightly. "You remember the exact language?" "Yes." "How exact?" Adrian opened the envelope. He removed the incident memorandum and placed it on the desk. Vega read the first page, then the second. Her posture changed. "You wrote this last night?" "Immediately after the encounter. These times are estimates?" "Cross-checked against phone location data and the recording metadata." Vega looked up again. "Recording?" Adrian placed the flash drive beside the document. He explained the backpack camera, then the exterior camera at the accounting office. Vega stopped writing. "You did not ask him to give you a copy?" "No. I didn't want to create an unnecessary custody issue. I gave him the incident time and asked him not to delete it. His contact information is here." Vega stared at him. "What do you do for work, Mr. Villanueva?" Adrian had known the question would come eventually. "I'm a federal judge." For the first time that morning, Lieutenant Vega's professional expression disappeared. "You're what?" "United States District Court. I was commissioned 3 weeks ago." Vega looked at the intake form, then back at him. "And you waited until now to mention that?" "My occupation didn't change what happened on Larkspur Avenue." "No, but it changes how I document this interview. It shouldn't change whether the complaint is taken seriously. The statement was not accusatory. That somehow made it land harder." Vega glanced toward the closed office door behind her. "I'm going to move this into an interview room." Adrian gathered nothing. All right. Then she asked Adrian to tell the story again from the beginning. He did. The second telling was almost identical to the first. When he did not know something, he said he did not know. When a time was approximate, he said approximate. When Vega asked whether Mercer had specifically said he intended to keep the property for himself, Adrian answered no. He called it something to verify, Adrian said. My concern is that nothing was documented and no receipt was issued. Did Officer Doyle take anything personally? I didn't see him place any property in his own pocket. Did he participate in the search? He handled the backpack briefly and deactivated his camera after Mercer looked at him. How do you know it was deactivated? The indicator light went out. Vega wrote that down. Did you say you were a judge? No. Why not? Adrian thought about the question. Because I didn't want a different standard applied to me than the one that would have been applied to someone else wearing the same hoodie. Vega's pen stopped. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she resumed the interview. By 10:03, the complaint had become an official internal case. At 10:28, she called the owner of the accounting office and requested preservation of the exterior footage. At 10:41, she requested the dispatch logs for Mercer's patrol unit. At 10:52, she requested both officers' body camera records. The first irregularity appeared 6 minutes later. There was no dispatch entry for Adrian's stop. Vega stared at the screen. Patrol units were allowed to initiate observational contacts without detailed pre-approval. But a stop involving a search and property seizure should have created several routine records. Instead, the unit log showed Mercer and Doyle available for service throughout the relevant period. She requested Mercer's end-of-shift report. At 11:19 it arrived. One paragraph described a consensual pedestrian contact with an unidentified male near Larkspur Avenue. It claimed the man volunteered to show identification, denied any search had occurred, and stated that no property was taken. Vega read the final sentence twice. No enforcement action necessary. Individual departed without incident. She printed the report. Then she opened Adrian's recording again. Turn around. For what reason? Turn around. She listened to the zipper opening. She listened to Mercer count the cash. She listened to Adrian ask for the property receipt. Then she returned to the report. No search conducted, no property taken. Vega's office suddenly felt very quiet. At noon, she walked 2 floors upstairs and knocked on Captain Helena Price's door. Price was reviewing staffing numbers and did not look pleased to be interrupted. What have you got? Vega closed the door behind her. A complaint against Mercer and Doyle. Price's expression tightened immediately. What kind? Undocumented stop, undocumented search, missing cash and property, body camera issue, false report potentially. Price set down her pen. Potentially. Vega placed Mercer's report beside a transcript of Adrian's audio. The complainant recorded part of the encounter, Price read. Who is he? Federal judge. Price looked up so sharply that Vega almost wished she had phrased it differently. Mercer stopped a federal judge? Mercer stopped a man in a hoodie. The fact that he was a federal judge came later. Price pushed back from the desk. Does Mercer know? Not from us. Keep it that way. Vega nodded. Price read the report again. Pull everything. Camera activations, deactivations, GPS, evidence logs, complaints. 18 months. Both officers. Already started. Price looked at her. You think this is bigger than one bad stop? Vega hesitated. I think Mercer wrote a report saying nothing happened when I have audio showing something happened. I want to know how often his paperwork says nothing happened. That afternoon, Adrian returned to the courthouse, passed through employee security, and went directly to chambers. Judge, we're ready. Adrian stepped toward the bench. He had spent the entire morning as a complainant, waiting in plastic chairs and answering questions beneath fluorescent lights. Now, a room full of people stood as he entered in a black robe. The contrast was not lost on him. Neither was the lesson. A title could change how a room reacted to a person in seconds, but a title did not change what was true. Across the city, Lieutenant Vega opened Mercer's body camera history. She expected to find one suspicious gap. Instead, the search returned 9. 9 gaps did not prove corruption. Lieutenant Marisol Vega repeated that sentence to herself as she opened the first body camera record. Equipment failed. Batteries died. Software froze. Officers forgot to reactivate cameras after breaks. A suspicious pattern could sometimes become ordinary once enough context was collected. But by the third file, ordinary was becoming difficult to defend. The dates stretched across 11 months. Each gap lasted between 4 and 8 minutes. Each occurred during an unscheduled pedestrian or vehicle contact. 7 had no corresponding citation. 6 had no dispatch record describing the person contacted. 5 ended with reports using nearly identical language. Consensual contact. No enforcement action. Individual departed without incident. Vega printed the reports and laid them across the conference table. Doyle's camera showed gaps on 7 of the same dates. That made her sit down. At 4:20, digital forensics delivered the metadata from Adrian's incident. Doyle's camera had recorded continuously until 9:23:21, when it was manually placed into privacy mode. It returned to normal operation 7 minutes later. The device had not malfunctioned. Someone had touched it. Vega requested supervisory authorization to preserve both officers' lockers, vehicles, and digital records pending further review. Captain Price approved the request without argument. Quietly, she said, "No interviews yet. I don't want them coordinating before we know what we're looking at." The next morning, Adrian woke before his alarm. He went running at 5:30, not in Harbour Crest. He chose the route along the waterfront he had used for years, where the bay opened dark and silver beside the path, and early commuters moved like shadows under the lamps. He wore a different sweatshirt, but halfway through the run he realized he had chosen it because it did not have a hood. That realization irritated him. He stopped near a railing and looked across the water. He did not want Mercer occupying space in decisions as small as what he wore, so the next morning, he told himself, he would wear the grey one again. At 7:10, his mother called. "You forgot to tell me if you deposited the money." Adrian slowed to a walk. "Not yet." "Why?" "Something came up. Something always comes up with you. That's why I gave it to you. If I waited for something not to come up, I'd still be holding it at Christmas." Despite himself, Adrian smiled. Lilia Villanueva was 68 and had mastered the art of expressing affection as practical criticism. "I'll handle it," he said. "And the folder?" "I looked through it." "Good. There was a photo in there. Your father at the old repair counter. Did you see it?" Adrian's smile faded. "I did." "He was so thin then. He ate like 3 people and stayed thin. Very annoying." Adrian laughed quietly. Then Lilia asked, "Are you wearing his watch?" He stopped walking. His mother could still surprise him with questions that seemed to come from nowhere. "Why?" "I dreamed about him last night. He was looking for his tools. Whenever I dream of your father, I check if you still have the watch." Adrian looked at his bare wrist. He could tell her. He almost did. "It's safe," he said. The answer was not exactly true, but he intended to make it true. After they hung up, Adrian stood by the water for another minute. Then he ran home. At the courthouse, his day moved through ordinary problems. A contract dispute, a scheduling conference, a motion over improperly produced records. People argued in measured voices, while Adrian listened, asked questions, and made rulings. The work steadied him. He had always liked the discipline of a courtroom. Facts entered one door, rules entered another. Emotion was not ignored, but it could not carry the whole case by itself. At lunch, Chief Judge Monroe appeared in his doorway. "Any contact from professional standards?" "No." "Good." Adrian looked up from a brief. "Good. If they start calling you because you're a judge, you'll wonder whether they would call someone else. Let them investigate." He set down the brief. "I'm trying." Monroe sat across from him. "Trying what?" "Not to think about the watch." "That's probably impossible." "Then I'm failing efficiently," she smiled. "Your father would appreciate that sentence." Adrian leaned back. He would tell me I should have worn a cheaper watch. Wasn't it already a cheap watch? Exactly. For a moment, the tension lifted. Then Monroe became serious. Adrian, there may come a point when this becomes larger than your complaint. If that happens, remember that you are allowed to be the person something happened to. You do not have to turn every part of it into a legal problem you can solve. He understood what she meant. He also knew he was not ready to accept it. Across town, Vega had begun locating the people named in the 9 camera gaps. It was not easy. Some reports contained only partial information. One listed a vehicle plate, but no driver. Another contained a first name and an approximate age. One simply said, male pedestrian contacted near Bayview Terrace. The fourth record led somewhere. The contact had occurred 6 months earlier outside a 24-hour grocery store. A license plate connected the car to Min Tran, a 52-year-old delivery driver from South San Francisco. Vega called him. At first, Min said he did not remember the officers. Then Vega gave him the date. Silence filled the line. Why are you asking? He said. I'm reviewing an incident record. Another pause. Am I in trouble? No. Then I don't want anything. Mr. Tran, I'm not asking you to file a complaint. I only need to confirm what happened during the contact. His voice changed. Nothing happened. Vega looked at Mercer's report. Nothing happened. Did either officer search your vehicle? I have to go. Did either officer take property from you? The line remained open. Vega could hear traffic through his phone. Finally, Min said, Why now? Because I'm looking at the record now. I told someone before. Vega sat straighter. Who? A desk officer. Next day, I said money was missing from my delivery envelope. He told me maybe I counted wrong. How much? $380. Vega wrote the number. Did you receive a complaint number? No. Would you be willing to speak with me in person? Min did not answer for several seconds. I don't want problems. I understand. No, you don't. Vega let that sit. Then she said, Maybe I don't. But I'm asking because someone else reported something similar this week. That changed everything. Someone else? Yes. Same officer. I can't discuss the details yet. Min breathed out slowly. Tomorrow morning, he said, before work. When the call ended, Vega searched the old intake database for Min Tran. Nothing. She searched by date. Nothing. She searched by Mercer's badge number. Nothing. No complaint had ever been entered. At 3:46, another contact record produced a name. Sophia Reyes, owner of a small cleaning company whose van had been stopped 8 months earlier. Vega called. Sophia listened to the date and immediately said, The sergeant with the heavy voice. Vega's pulse quickened. Do you remember his name? Mercer. What happened? Sophia hesitated. He said one of my business permits looked wrong. He checked a cash pouch we used for supplies. After they left, $200 was gone. Did you report it? My sister told me not to bother. Why? Because who was going to believe that story? Vega looked at the 9 printed camera gaps spread across her desk. She had started the morning with a pattern. By late afternoon, the pattern had names. Cole Mercer knew something had changed before anyone told him. On Friday morning, Mercer entered the Harbor Crest station and found Captain Price speaking quietly with a technician beside the equipment room. The conversation stopped when he passed. He kept walking. Doyle noticed too. Something's up, Doyle said 20 minutes later as they prepared the patrol unit. Mercer checked the mirrors. Something is always up. Price was downstairs at 6:30. She never comes in that early. Then maybe she's finally earning the extra stripe. Doyle did not laugh. Mercer looked at him. You need to relax. I am relaxed. Doyle fastened his seatbelt. That guy complained. Mercer's hand paused on the ignition. You don't know that. I know it. How? Because guys like him don't talk the way he talked unless they know what they're doing. Mercer started the engine. Guys like him? Calm, specific, asking for receipts, watching the camera. Mercer pulled away from the curb. So what? So maybe we picked the wrong person. Mercer's expression hardened. There is no wrong person. There's only sloppy work. And if you decide to panic, that's sloppy. Doyle stared through the windshield. Where's the watch? Safe. You should get rid of it. Mercer looked over. That's the dumbest thing you've said this week. Why? Because getting rid of something makes it look like you had something to get rid of. Doyle said nothing after that. At 8:14, Lieutenant Vega interviewed Min Tran. He arrived in a reflective delivery jacket and carried a paper cup of coffee he never drank. He sat near the edge of the chair and kept his phone in his hand throughout the meeting. Vega did not rush him. She asked him to describe the stop in his own words. Min had been finishing a late route when Mercer and Doyle pulled behind his car outside a grocery store. Mercer said the license plate light appeared dim. The conversation was ordinary, until Mercer asked whether Min carried cash for deliveries. Min explained that after Mercer directed him to open the delivery bag, $380 was missing. No receipt was issued, and Min had not seen either officer physically take it. He had called his dispatcher immediately because he feared being blamed for the missing funds. The company recorded those calls, giving Vega a time-stamped statement made minutes after the stop. Within an hour, Vega had a preservation request on the way. At 10:30, Sophia Reyes arrived. She described another late-night stop, unrelated questions, a search of a business cash pouch and $200 missing afterward. She had never filed a formal complaint, because she could not afford to lose workdays arguing over money she could not prove had been taken. By noon, the investigation had crossed an invisible line. It was no longer about whether Adrian Villanueva's property had been improperly retained. It was about whether Mercer and Doyle had discovered a repeatable method for taking small amounts from people unlikely to pursue formal complaints. Captain Price authorized a deeper audit covering 3 years. The results began arriving that afternoon. 17 camera interruptions, 11 involving both Mercer and Doyle, 4 involving Mercer with other junior officers, 2 involving Mercer alone. At 1:18, the accounting office on Larkspur Avenue delivered its exterior footage. The camera angle was distant but steady. It showed Adrian standing beneath the street lamp, Mercer approaching, Adrian turning, Mercer opening the backpack, Mercer examining something in his hand. Then, clearly enough to identify the movement, Mercer slipping the Seiko into his jacket pocket. Vega replayed that section 3 times. At 1:26, she called Captain Price. "We have the watch on video." Price came downstairs immediately. They watched the clip together. "Can we identify the object?" Price asked. "Not the model from this distance, but timing aligns with Villanueva's recording. His audio captures Mercer asking about the watch at the exact moment this video shows him removing something from the wrist." Price folded her arms. "And Mercer's report says no property was taken." "Yes." Price stared at the screen. "Preserve the cruiser." "Already requested." "I mean physically." "Take it out of service now." Vega understood. If property remained inside, every minute mattered. At Harbour Crest Station, Mercer and Doyle were called back from patrol at 2:03. Their supervisor met them in the garage. "Units being held for equipment inspection," he said. Mercer did not react. Doyle did. "What kind of inspection?" "Don't know." "Hand me the keys." Mercer placed them in the supervisor's palm. "Can we take another unit?" "You're assigned desk duties for the rest of shift." Doyle looked at Mercer. Mercer did not look back. 10 minutes later, in the locker room, Doyle shut the door behind them. "They know." Mercer opened his locker. "They know the car needs an inspection." "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Talking like every sentence has a loophole." Mercer turned. "Then stop asking questions you don't want." "Answered." Doyle lowered his voice. "Was the watch in the car?" Mercer stared at him for a long moment. "No." "Where is it?" "Not here." "Cole, go do your paperwork." Doyle did not move. "If this becomes an investigation, I'm not lying for you." Mercer's face remained still. Interesting choice of words. "What does that mean?" "It means you were standing there too." The message was clear. Whatever happened next, Doyle would not be allowed to imagine himself outside it. At almost the same time, Adrian was sitting in his mother's kitchen. He had come over after court because he had delayed the conversation long enough. Lilia placed tea in front of him and immediately noticed the bare wrist. "You said it was safe." Adrian looked at her. There was no useful version of the truth left except the truth itself. "Mum, something happened Wednesday night." She sat down slowly. Adrian explained the stop. He left out nothing important, but he kept his voice calm. When he finished, Lilia did not ask about the money. She asked only one question. "Did you tell them whose watch it was?" "Yes." Her eyes lowered. "And they still took it?" "Yes." For several seconds she said nothing. Then she reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Your father would tell you not to become like the people who disappoint you." Adrian swallowed. "I know." "Do you?" He looked at her. Lilia's expression was gentle but firm. "Because knowing the law is not the same as knowing what anger does to a person." Adrian did not answer. His phone vibrated on the table. A message from Lieutenant Vega. "Mr. Villanueva, we have confirmed recovery-relevant video evidence. The investigation has expanded. I may need a follow-up statement next week." Adrian read it twice, expanded. Across town, investigators sealed Mercer and Doyle's patrol vehicle and began documenting every compartment. Under the passenger seat, they found nothing. In the center console, they found paperwork, charging cables, coins, and an old parking citation. No watch. But inside the glove compartment was a small spiral notebook that did not belong to the department. Most pages contained dates, initials, locations, and short numbers written in Mercer's handwriting. Vega stared at the first completed page. Then she recognized one of the dates. It matched Min Tran's stop. Beside it were 3 characters, MT 380. The notebook changed the investigation in less than 10 seconds. Lieutenant Marisol Vega did not touch it again. After recognizing Min Tran's initials, she photographed the open page exactly as it had been found, asked the evidence technician to record its position inside the glove compartment, and then stepped away from the patrol car. MT 380. There were 16 other lines on that page. Most followed the same pattern. 2 or 3 initials, a date, a neighborhood abbreviation, a number between 90 and 7920. No explanation, no department case numbers, no evidence tags, nothing that belonged in an official police record. Captain Helena Price arrived in the garage 5 minutes later. She stood beside Vega while the technician turned each page beneath a camera. "Tell me that could be anything," Price said. "It could," Vega replied. Price looked at her. Vega added, "Until we match it." They started with what they already knew. MT matched Min Tran. 380 matched the amount he had reported missing to his dispatcher minutes after the stop. SR appeared 8 months earlier beside the number 200. Sophia Reyes had described exactly $200 missing from her company cash pouch. Price slowly folded her arms. "That's 2. 2 is not 17. But it isn't 0. Vega requested every incident report connected to the dates in the notebook. By late afternoon, 6 lines had plausible matches. A restaurant employee named Daniel Cho, a rideshare driver named Roberto Alvarez, a home health aide named May Santos, a college maintenance worker named Gerald Price, no relation to the captain. None had formal sustained complaints against Mercer. 2 had tried to speak to someone afterward. 1 had written an email that had been routed to a general mailbox and closed as a customer service issue. The pattern was not dramatic. That was what made it disturbing. Small amounts. $140, $260, a gift card, a watch, a pair of wireless earbuds. Things valuable enough to hurt, but often not valuable enough for a tired person working 2 jobs to spend weeks fighting a bureaucracy over. At 5:40 that evening, Vega called Adrian. He was still in chambers reviewing a motion when his phone lit up with her name. "Lieutenant, I need to ask you one question about the cash your mother gave you." Adrian put down his pen. "All right." "Exact amount." $640. "You're certain?" Yes, she counted it at the kitchen table. 600 in 20s and 2 20s from a smaller envelope. Did you tell either officer the exact amount? No. Mercer counted it himself. Vega was quiet. Adrian recognized the kind of silence. It was the silence of someone confirming a fact she had hoped might be wrong. What did you find? He asked. I can't discuss evidence from an active investigation. I know. Another pause, then Vega said, Your figure matters. That was all. After the call, Adrian remained still for several moments. The city outside his windows had begun turning gold in the late afternoon light. Lawyers moved through the hall beyond his door. A printer started somewhere near the clerk's office. Everything about the courthouse felt ordinary. His own mind did not. $640. The amount suddenly felt less like missing money and more like a coordinate on a map whose shape he could not yet see. At his mother's house that night, Lilia noticed immediately that he was distracted. You are chewing without tasting, she said. I'm tasting. What are you eating? Adrian looked down at his plate. She raised an eyebrow. Exactly. He smiled despite himself. Lilia sat across from him. Did they find the watch? Not yet. Then what did they find? I don't know. She gave him the look she had used when he was 15 and claimed not to know how a broken lamp had appeared on the floor. Adrian corrected himself. I know the investigation expanded. I don't know the details. And you hate that? Yes. Because you like knowing details? Yes. And because you are used to being the person who gets the file? Adrian leaned back. That too. Lilia poured tea. Maybe this time your job is to let someone else carry the file. He looked at her. She shrugged. Your father spent 40 years fixing radios. Sometimes people brought him one and stood over his shoulder telling him where the problem was. He hated that. I remember. He would say, if you know how to fix it, why did you bring it to me? Adrian laughed. Very philosophical. No. Very irritated. For the first time since Wednesday night, Adrian felt the pressure in his chest loosen. Across town, Evan Doyle felt his tightening. At 7:12, he sat alone at his kitchen table while his phone buzzed with a message from Mercer. You good? Doyle stared at the screen. He typed yes. Deleted it. Typed what's happening. Deleted that too. Finally, he locked the phone and placed it face down. His wife, Natalie, entered carrying a basket of folded laundry. You've been sitting there for 20 minutes. Long shift. You're not on shift. He looked up. Natalie studied him. Did something happen at work? No. The answer came too quickly. She did not challenge it. She simply carried the basket upstairs. Doyle remained alone. He thought about Larkspur Avenue, Adrian asking for a receipt, Mercer taking the watch, his own hand rising to the body camera. Then he thought about the other nights, the grocery store, the cleaning van, the delivery driver. He had told himself the same thing each time. Mercer was the sergeant. Mercer made the decisions. Mercer knew where the line was. Doyle had never asked what happened to the line after they crossed it. At 8:03, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was not Mercer. Department of Professional Standards. Report Monday at 8:01 a.m. You are directed not to discuss the subject matter of the interview with other involved personnel. Doyle read the message 3 times. Then another message appeared. Mercer, call me. Doyle looked from one message to the other. For the first time in 6 years of working beside Cole Mercer, he did not call back. Monday morning arrived grey and cold. At 7:54, Doyle entered the Professional Standards building with a union representative beside him. He looked exhausted. At 7:57, Cole Mercer entered through a different door with an attorney. Neither man saw the other. Vega had arranged it that way. She began with Doyle. The interview room contained a table, 4 chairs, a wall clock, and a camera mounted high in one corner. Vega placed a printed copy of the Larkspur report in front of him. Officer Doyle, did Sergeant Mercer search Adrian Villanueva's backpack? Doyle looked at his representative, then at the report, then at Vega. Yes. It was the first official statement from either officer that contradicted Mercer's written version. Vega did not react. Did Sergeant Mercer remove cash from that backpack? Doyle swallowed. Yes. Did he return it? A longer silence. No. Did he remove a wristwatch? Doyle closed his eyes for a moment. Yes. And why did you deactivate your body camera? He opened his eyes. For several seconds, the room held nothing but the movement of the wall clock. Then, Evan Doyle said the sentence Cole Mercer had spent years making sure no partner would ever say, because he looked at me and I knew what he wanted me to do. Doyle did not become cooperative all at once. He became cooperative one answer at a time. Lieutenant Vega had conducted enough interviews to know the difference. People who arrived ready to confess often spoke too quickly, as if speed could reduce the weight of what they were saying. Doyle did the opposite. Every admission seemed to cost him something. Had Sergeant Mercer asked you to deactivate your camera before? Vega said. Doyle stared at the printed report. Yes. How many times? I don't know. More than 5? Yes. More than 10. His union representative shifted beside him. Doyle rubbed both palms against his knees. Probably. Vega placed a photograph of the spiral notebook on the table. His face changed immediately. You recognize this? Doyle looked at his representative again. You need to answer truthfully, the representative said. Doyle nodded. I've seen it. Whose is it? Mercer's. What do the numbers mean? I never asked. Vega let the silence stretch. Doyle finally added, I knew better than to ask. That isn't an answer. It's the only one I have. Vega turned the photograph so the first page faced him. MT, 380. Min Tran says $380 disappeared during a stop involving you and Mercer. SR, 200. Sophia Reyes says $200 disappeared. AV, 640 appears on the last page, dated Wednesday night. Doyle's eyes dropped. Adrian's initials were there. So was the exact amount. The notebook had been placed in the glove compartment after the stop, but before the cruiser was sealed. Mercer had written the entry sometime during those 2 days. Vega leaned forward. What do the numbers mean? Doyle spoke so quietly, the microphone almost missed it. What he took. The room became very still. Vega had expected the answer. Expectation did not make hearing it easier. Did you receive any of it? Doyle shook his head, then stopped. His face tightened. Sometimes. His representative turned toward him. Vega said nothing. Doyle continued because stopping had become harder than speaking. Not cash most of the time, food cards, electronics, things people didn't have receipts for. Mercer called it abandoned property. Was it logged? No. Was it abandoned? Doyle looked at the table. No. He described a routine so ordinary in its execution that Vega could understand how it had survived. Mercer chose stops that could be explained later as discretionary contacts. He preferred late shifts, commercial edges of residential neighborhoods, parking lots with poor camera coverage, and people who seemed rushed, tired, or uncertain about procedure. The amounts stayed small. The report stayed vague. When a camera interruption occurred, Mercer used nearly identical language about equipment checks or privacy mode. He said nobody builds a career around complaining about $200, Doyle said. Vega felt anger rise and pushed it back down. Where is Adrian Villanueva's watch? Doyle shook his head. I don't know. You saw Mercer take it? Yes. Did he have it after the shift? I saw it in the console the next morning. And after that? Gone. Where does he keep other property? Doyle hesitated. I don't know. Vega waited. He has a garage cabinet at home, Doyle said. I saw headphones in there once, a tablet, 2 watches. He said they were old evidence nobody wanted. By noon, the department had placed both men on administrative suspension pending investigation. Their access cards were disabled. Their service equipment was collected. The notebook and Doyle's statement were forwarded to the district attorney's public integrity unit. and because several encounters potentially implicated federal civil rights statutes, a federal liaison was notified as well. Adrian learned none of that until Tuesday afternoon. Vega called him shortly after 4. "We've located your cash in a record," she said. Adrian frowned. "What does that mean?" "I can't explain the document yet. But the exact amount was written down by one of the officers after your stop." He sat back in his chair. 6:40. "Yes. And the watch?" "Not recovered yet." Adrian looked through his office window toward the bay. "Lieutenant, is this still an internal matter?" "No." That single word told him more than a paragraph could have. He closed the file in front of him. "What do you need from me?" "A supplemental statement confirming that you did not authorize either officer to retain the cash or watch, and that no property receipt was provided." "That's easy." "I also need you to understand something." Adrian waited. "You're likely to become publicly connected to this investigation eventually." He had known that. Knowing and hearing were different. "I understand. I'm telling you before reporters discover the complaint." "Thank you." After the call, Adrian went to Chief Judge Monroe's chambers. She listened as he explained what Vega had said. "Federal liaison," Monroe repeated. "That's my inference." "Reasonable inference." Adrian stood near the window with his hands in his pockets. "This is going to become a problem for the court." "No," Monroe said. "It may become a logistical issue for the court. Don't give it the dignity of being a problem before it earns one." He smiled faintly. "There's another possibility. That it lands here." "Yes." Monroe leaned back. "If charges are filed in this district, assignment procedures exist, disclosure procedures exist, recusal procedures exist. We use them. I don't want anyone thinking I used my office to influence this. Then keep doing exactly what you've done." Adrian looked at her. "Which is, nothing beyond what any complainant should do." That evening, Adrian finally told his mother the investigation might involve other people. Lilia was quiet for a long time. "Other people lost things too?" she asked. "It appears so." "And they did not get them back?" "I don't know yet." She looked toward the framed photograph of Ramon near the kitchen doorway. "Your father would be angry." "I am angry." "No." She looked back at Adrian. "Your father would be loud. You are doing that thing where you become extra calm because you are angry." He almost objected, then realized she was right. Lilia reached for his empty wrist and turned his hand palm up. "This is not the only thing they took from people," she said. Adrian understood. Confidence in a process could be lost in amounts too small to make headlines. A complaint, ignored. A missing envelope, a person deciding next time not to call. The next morning, investigators obtained judicial authorization to search specific areas of Mercer's home connected to the property records and notebook. They entered the detached garage just after sunrise. The space was clean. Too clean, Vega thought. Tools hung in straight lines. Storage bins carried printed labels. A metal cabinet stood against the far wall with a small key lock. Inside were old cables, boxed phones, watches, earbuds, gift cards, wallets with identification removed, and envelopes containing cash amounts written on sticky notes. Each item was photographed where it sat. On the second shelf rested a grey fabric pouch. Vega opened it under the evidence camera. Inside was a brushed steel Seiko. The band was worn smooth at the edges. She turned it over. 4 engraved words caught the garage. Light. Remember where you came from. For the first time since the investigation began, Marisol Vega smiled. Not because the case was over. It was nowhere near over. She smiled because one small thing that had been taken under the assumption that nobody would make the effort to find it had just been found. The watch remained in evidence. That was the first thing Lieutenant Vega told Adrian when she called. "We recovered an item matching your description and serial number," she said. "I can't release it yet." Adrian was standing alone beside the bench after the courtroom had emptied for lunch. He closed his eyes. "You found it?" "Yes." "Where?" I can't discuss the search details while charging decisions are pending. He exhaled slowly. I understand. There's more. Adrian waited. We recovered multiple items that may belong to other people connected to the audit. His relief changed shape. The watch had been personal. The cabinet made it structural. How many? Enough that we're building an identification process. Adrian rested one hand on the edge of the bench. When can I see it? The watch? Yes. Not today. I'll arrange it as soon as evidence rules allow. Thank you, Lieutenant. After they hung up, Adrian remained in the empty courtroom. For days he had imagined the moment the Seiko returned to his wrist. He had assumed recovery would feel like an ending. Instead, it felt like a door opening onto a larger room. At the Public Integrity Office, prosecutors spent the afternoon reviewing what had been recovered from Mercer's garage. Every object required work. Serial numbers had to be checked. Prior reports had to be compared. Owners had to be located without contaminating future statements. The notebook provided a map, but not every entry was obvious. One line read, JP, 150 BVT. Investigators found a Jordan Patel who had been stopped in Bayview Terrace 11 months earlier. He denied losing cash, but remembered a prepaid transit card disappearing from his wallet. Another line connected to an electrician named Henry Park, whose expensive flashlight and compact tool meter had been retained during what Mercer described as an ownership verification. Park had never seen them again. The amounts and objects varied. The method did not. By Thursday, prosecutors had identified 9 potential complainants, whose accounts aligned with notebook entries or camera gaps. 6 agreed to formal interviews. 3 initially refused. Min Tran came back voluntarily. This time he did not sit near the edge of the chair. When Vega showed him a photograph of an envelope recovered from Mercer's cabinet, she covered the evidence label and asked whether anything about it looked familiar. Min stared at a blue company stamp in the corner. That's ours, he said. His voice broke slightly on the second word. Vega did not fill the silence. Min looked at the photograph for a long time. I told them, he said. I know. No, I told them the next morning. I know. And they told me I counted wrong. Vega nodded. Min leaned back and looked at the ceiling. I started taking pictures of every envelope after that, every night, before and after deliveries. My boss thought I didn't trust him. Vega understood then that a missing $380 had continued costing Min long after the money was gone, not financially, in the small habits people build after they stop trusting what should have been. Routine. On Friday morning, the department held a closed administrative hearing to determine whether Mercer and Doyle should remain suspended while the criminal investigation continued. Mercer appeared remotely with counsel. Doyle appeared separately. Mercer denied taking property for personal use. His attorney argued that the garage items were old, unclaimed property, informal safekeeping, gifts, and objects collected over years without criminal intent. The notebook, he said, was a personal memory aid related to street contacts. Captain Price listened without visible reaction. Then the department attorney asked a simple question. If MT means Min Tran, why does the number beside his initials equal the precise amount Mr. Tran reported missing? Mercer's attorney objected to the characterization. The hearing officer overruled him. Mercer looked directly into the camera. I don't recall. And SR? I don't recall. AV. 640. Mercer's eyes shifted for the first time. I don't recall. The hearing officer approved continued suspension. The first article appeared at 2:18 Friday afternoon. 2 Harbor Crest officers suspended amid property misconduct investigation. No victim was named. No judge was mentioned. Mercer read every line anyway. Doyle read it too. Then he called his attorney and said he wanted to amend his statement. By evening, Doyle had described 3 additional stops not yet connected to the notebook. He provided locations, approximate dates, and the name of a former rookie officer who had once questioned Mercer's instructions. Most importantly, Doyle explained how Mercer selected people, not by ethnicity, not by a single neighborhood, by perceived inconvenience. He liked people who looked busy, Doyle said. Delivery workers, contractors, drivers, people who had somewhere to be. He said time was leverage. If fighting you costs more than what you lost, most people leave. Vega wrote the sentence exactly. Time was leverage. The irony would have been almost elegant if the consequences were not so ordinary. Adrian spent that same Friday evening at his mother's house repairing a cabinet hinge. Lilia watched from the kitchen table. "You are doing it wrong," she said. "I've tightened 2 screws. Your father would have removed the door. Your father also kept screws in coffee cans labeled by decade. He was organized. He was impossible." Lilia smiled. Adrian finished the hinge and opened the cabinet twice to test it. "Good," she said. He sat across from her. "They found the watch." Lilia's expression went still. "They did." He nodded. "Can you have it?" "Not yet." She reached across the table and touched the faint, pale line on his wrist where the watch had rested for years. "Then at least we know where it is." "Yes." "Your father would say this proves his filing system." "Worked," Adrian laughed. "The serial number helped. Exactly, he would be unbearable." For a few minutes they talked about Ramon instead of Mercer. That mattered more than Adrian expected. The watch had been taken in one moment, but Adrian refused to let that moment become the strongest memory attached to it. Monday brought another development. The district attorney's public integrity unit formally referred portions of the investigation to federal prosecutors because the alleged conduct had occurred under official authority and involved a repeated pattern across multiple jurisdictions. A joint task group was established. The case file acquired a federal number. Chief Judge Monroe received notice through administrative channels before Adrian heard anything directly. She called him into chambers and closed the door. "It may come here," she said. Adrian already knew what she meant. "The case?" "Yes." He sat down. Monroe placed a single sheet of paper between them. "Nothing has been assigned. Nothing has been charged, but the United States Attorney's Office has opened a matter." Adrian stared at the paper without touching it. For the first time, the distance between the sidewalk on Larkspur Avenue and the courthouse felt very short. "What do you need me to do?" "Nothing," Monroe said, "which may be the hardest instruction anyone gives you this week." He looked at her. "And if it is assigned to me?" "Then we follow the rules in the open." Adrian nodded. Outside, through the tall courthouse windows, the city moved as it always did. Buses stopped. Pedestrians crossed against lights. People hurried back from lunch carrying coffee and folders. Somewhere among them were people who had once decided that reporting $200 missing was not worth losing another. That afternoon, Adrian thought about that as he returned to his own courtroom. He had wanted his father's watch back. Now he wanted something harder. He wanted the process to prove that a person should not need a title, a camera, or a perfect record of the time to be taken seriously. The federal case moved faster, once the evidence stopped depending on any single person. That was what changed everything. Adrian's recording had started the investigation. Mintran's dispatcher call supported one earlier incident. Sophia Reyes supported another. The notebook connected dates and amounts. The garage cabinet supplied physical property. Doyle supplied method and intent. Department metadata showed deliberate camera interruptions. Each piece answered a weakness in another. By the end of the week, prosecutors were no longer asking whether misconduct had occurred. They were deciding which incidents could be proved cleanly enough to charge. Assistant United States Attorney Rachel Kim led the review. She was 42, careful with language, and known inside the office for cutting complicated cases down to the facts a jury actually needed. Her first instruction to the team was simple. "We are not prosecuting a bad personality," she said. "We are prosecuting acts we can prove." She divided the evidence into 3 columns: documented stop, corroborated property loss, recovered or independently verified item. 5 incidents met all 3 standards. 3 more were strong but incomplete. Several others remained part of the administrative investigation but would not form the core of the criminal case. Adrian's incident was the strongest because of the overlapping recordings and the notebook entry. It was also the most sensitive. Kim understood why before anyone told her Adrian's job. When she learned, she closed the file and asked everyone else to leave the conference room. Then she called Chief Judge Monroe's administrative counsel. Within hours, formal conflict procedures began. Adrian knew none of the details. He spent Wednesday morning hearing arguments in an insurance dispute, and Wednesday afternoon reviewing a request to seal business records. At 4:30, his clerk, Naomi Chen, appeared at the office door. "Judge, there are reporters downstairs." Adrian looked up. "For what?" Naomi gave him a look that answered the question. The article had been published 12 minutes earlier. Federal judge identified as complainant in Harbor Crest officer investigation. Adrian read the headline once, then the first paragraph, then he stopped. "Where did they get my name?" "Article says sources familiar with the complaint." "Meaning nobody they'll identify?" "Probably," Naomi hesitated. "The communications office wants to know whether you'll issue a statement." Adrian thought of the sidewalk, the grey hoodie, Mercer asking what he did for work. No statement about the facts. Anything at all? He considered it. "Say I filed a complaint as a private citizen and will respect the investigative process. Nothing else." Naomi nodded. "And Naomi?" "Yes?" "Make sure nobody says my position makes the complaint more serious." She understood immediately. "Got it." The story spread anyway. By evening, local television had footage of the courthouse, the Harbor Crest station, and a distant image of Larkspur Avenue. Reporters described Adrian as a newly appointed Filipino-American federal judge, the son of immigrants from the Philippines, and the complainant whose encounter had triggered a broader property investigation. Lilia watched exactly 4 minutes before turning off the television. When Adrian called, she answered on the first ring. "You look tired in that courthouse photograph," she said. "That photograph is 3 years old." "Then you looked tired 3 years ago." He smiled. "Are reporters outside?" "One car was here. I closed the blinds." "I'm sorry." "Why? You did not send them." "I don't want you pulled into this." Lilia was quiet. Then she said, "Your father and I came here when nobody knew our name. We did not spend all those years building a life so our son would become afraid when people finally learned his." Adrian leaned back in his chair. "I'm not afraid." "No. You are worried about being misunderstood. That is different." Again, she had found the sentence he had been avoiding. He worried people would see the investigation as special treatment for a judge. He worried every other complainant would become a footnote beneath his title. He worried the story would become about surprise, rather than pattern. A judge in a hoodie made a good headline. A delivery driver losing $380 did not. The next morning, Adrian asked Chief Judge Monroe whether he could speak publicly about the other complainants once the case allowed it. "No," she said. He frowned. "You are not their spokesperson." "I know." "Do you?" He recognized his mother's tone in Monroe's question, and almost laughed. Monroe continued, "You cannot repair the imbalance by taking control of their stories. Let them decide what they want said." Adrian considered that, then nodded. "You're right. I enjoy hearing that. Say it again. Don't push it." By Friday, a federal grand jury had returned a sealed indictment against Mercer and Doyle on multiple counts, involving deprivation of rights under color of authority, falsification of records, unlawful conversion of property, and obstruction-related conduct tied to body camera records. Doyle's cooperation affected the charges against him, but did not erase his participation. The indictment remained sealed until both men could be processed. Mercer learned first. 2 federal agents and an internal affairs commander met him at his attorney's office at 7:30 Monday morning. He was permitted to surrender without spectacle. His attorney read the charging document before Mercer did. "This is not an internal case anymore," he said quietly. Mercer looked at the first page. United States of America versus Cole Mercer and Evan Doyle. He read Adrian Villanueva's initials in the factual section, then Min Tran, Sophia Reyes, Henry Park, others. Names he had reduced in his notebook to letters and numbers now filled paragraphs. His attorney pointed to the section describing the recovered watch. "Who is Villanueva?" he asked. Mercer said nothing. "You know him?" "The guy from Larkspur." "The judge?" Mercer looked up sharply. His attorney stared back. "You didn't know?" For several seconds, Mercer seemed unable to process the question. Then he laughed once. It was not amusement. It was disbelief trying to disguise itself. "No." His attorney removed his glasses. "You stopped a federal judge, took property that was later found in your garage, wrote the exact amount of his cash in a private notebook, and filed a report saying nothing was taken." Mercer's jaw tightened. "I did not know who he was." His attorney stared at him. "That sentence is not helping you." The arraignment was scheduled for 2 days later at the federal courthouse. Assignment would be made through the court's normal system. On Tuesday afternoon, Chief Judge Monroe called Adrian into her office. A sealed administrative envelope sat on her desk. She did not open it immediately. "We have a complication," she said. Adrian knew before she continued. "The assignment system selected your courtroom for the initial proceedings." He looked at the envelope. "Then reassign it." "It may be reassigned, but the formal disclosure process has to occur on the record. Defense counsel has already been notified of the conflict issue. The first appearance remains calendared in courtroom 7 tomorrow morning, while the motion is addressed." Adrian's expression tightened. "I don't like this." "Neither do I." "Then why allow it?" "Because courts do not solve uncomfortable questions by pretending they never arose." Monroe slid the envelope toward him. "You will make the disclosure. Counsel will be heard. The court will follow the applicable procedure. Nothing more." Adrian looked through the window at the fading light. Somewhere Mercer now knew who he was. That changed nothing about the evidence. But tomorrow, for the first time since Larkspur Avenue, they would be in the same room. And this time, Cole Mercer would not be standing beside a patrol car deciding which rules mattered. The morning of the federal proceeding began before sunrise. Adrian woke at 4:52 without an alarm. Adrian got up and opened the drawer where he normally kept his watches. The empty Seiko box sat at the back. He touched the lid, then closed the drawer. At 5:30 he went running. He wore the grey hoodie. He had promised himself he would. The city was still dark when he reached the waterfront. Fog hung low over the bay, and the lamps along the path made pale circles on the pavement. Adrian ran without music. His breathing settled into rhythm. He thought about what Lilia had said. "Do not become like the people who disappoint you." He thought about what Monroe had said. "Courts do not solve uncomfortable questions by pretending they never arose." And he thought about Min Tran, who had reported missing money and been told he probably counted wrong. By the time Adrian returned home, he knew what he wanted to say on the record. Not much. Only what was necessary. At 7:20, Cole Mercer sat in a conference room 2 floors below courtroom 7, wearing a dark blue suit and a tie his attorney had chosen for him. For 17 years, Mercer had entered courthouses as an officer or witness. That morning he entered through the public security checkpoint with no badge and no authority. His attorney, Benjamin Carr, placed a folder in front of him. "We're addressing assignment first," Carr said. Mercer stared at the tabletop. "You said they would move it." "I said there is an obvious conflict issue. He's the complainant." "Yes." "He cannot sit there." Carr studied him. "Then why do you look surprised that the court has a process for deciding that?" Mercer said nothing. Across the hall, Evan Doyle sat with separate counsel. He looked thinner than he had a week earlier. His wife knew enough now to ask the question he still could not answer. How many times had he known something was wrong and done it anyway? At 8:35, Assistant United States Attorney Rachel Kim entered courtroom 7 with 2 prosecutors and a stack of files. The gallery held reporters, department officials, and several members of the public. Min Tran had come before his delivery shift. Sophia Reyes sat nearby. Neither had met Adrian. At 8:47, Mercer entered. Conversation in the gallery lowered but did not stop. He sat beside Carr and kept his eyes on the papers in front of him. Doyle entered a minute later and took the second defense table. Mercer finally looked over. Doyle did not return the glance. Carr leaned toward Mercer. Whatever happens, do not react. I know how court works. Carr's expression suggested that this was not currently one of Mercer's strengths. At 8:59, the courtroom deputy stepped to the microphone. All rise. Chairs moved against the floor. Mercer stood. So did Doyle. So did Min Tran and Sophia Reyes. The deputy continued. The United States District Court for the Northern District is now in session. The Honorable Adrian R. Villanueva presiding. The door behind the bench opened. Adrian stepped into the courtroom wearing a black robe. For half a second, Mercer did not recognize him. The robe changed the outline. The courtroom changed the context. The man on Larkspur Avenue had worn an old grey hoodie and carried leftover pancit in a backpack. Then Adrian looked toward the defense table. Recognition crossed Mercer's face so quickly he could not hide it. His shoulders stiffened, his mouth opened slightly. Doyle recognized Adrian at the same moment. Unlike Mercer, he looked down. Adrian took his seat. The courtroom settled. He opened the administrative folder in front of him. His voice, when he spoke, was calm. Please be seated. Everyone sat. Adrian looked first at the prosecution, then at each defense table. This matter comes before the court on initial appearance and on a threshold issue concerning judicial assignment. Before any substantive proceeding occurs, I will place a disclosure on the record. Carr was already standing. Your Honor, I will hear you in a moment. Counsel. Carr stopped. Adrian continued. I am the complainant in one of the incidents referenced in the charging materials. I filed a private citizen complaint after an encounter with the defendants on Larkspur Avenue. I have had no role in the prosecution, charging decision, investigative strategy, witness selection, or evidence review, beyond providing information requested from me as a complainant. No one moved. Adrian's eyes rested on the papers, not Mercer. The matter was assigned through the court's ordinary random process. Chief Judge Monroe was informed of the potential conflict before the assignment became public. The purpose of this hearing is to address that issue openly and according to the court's established procedures. Carr rose again. Your Honor, the defense moves for immediate reassignment. Adrian nodded. Your motion is noted. Mercer leaned toward Carr and whispered something. Carr did not answer. Adrian looked toward Doyle's attorney. Does your client join the motion? Yes, Your Honor. Government. Rachel Kim stood. The United States takes no position beyond requesting that whatever assignment determination is made preserve the integrity and appearance of fairness in the proceeding. Adrian nodded. That was the correct answer. Not loyalty to him, not resistance to the defense. Fairness. The word settled something inside him. Then Carr said, Your Honor, with respect, my client only learned yesterday that you were the person involved in the Larkspur incident. For the first time, Adrian looked directly at Mercer. Mercer met his eyes. The street lamp seemed very far away now. Adrian did not smile. He did not allow anger into his voice. What your client knew about my occupation at the time of the encounter is not relevant to whether this court follows proper procedure today. Mercer's face tightened. Adrian continued, and I want the record to be clear on one point. The integrity of this case cannot depend on whether the person standing on that sidewalk was a federal judge. In the gallery, Min Tran lifted his head. Sophia Reyes stopped looking at her hands. Adrian's voice remained even. The same process should exist for a delivery driver, a business owner, a contractor, a student, or anyone else who files a complaint supported by evidence. Titles do not create rights. They do not make property more worthy of protection. They do not make one person's statement inherently more valuable than another's. Mercer stared at the bench. For the first time, the thing he had misunderstood on Larkspur Avenue became impossible to avoid. The man in the hoodie had never needed to tell him who he was. That had been the point. Adrian closed the folder. The court will take a brief recess while the assignment motion is handled under the applicable procedure. No merits issue will be addressed until that process is complete. He lifted the gavel but did not strike it immediately. His eyes moved once more across the room. Min, Sophia, Doyle, Mercer. Then the gavel came down once. Court is in recess. Adrian stood and disappeared through the door behind the bench. The proceeding had lasted less than 9 minutes, but as Cole Mercer remained seated at the defense table, staring at the empty judge's chair, 9 minutes were enough. Days earlier, he had looked at a Filipino-American man in a grey hoodie and decided, without knowing anything else, that the man had less power than he did. Now he understood the mistake was larger than failing to recognize a judge. He had built an entire system around assuming that ordinary people would stay ordinary once he wrote them that way. And outside the courtroom, the people whose names had once been reduced to initials were waiting to be called one by one. The recess lasted 27 minutes. For Cole Mercer, it felt longer. He remained at the defense table while attorneys moved in and out of the courtroom carrying folders, whispering near the rail, checking phones in the hallway, and returning with the careful expressions people wore when they knew every gesture might be noticed. Evan Doyle sat at the second defense table and never once looked toward him. Mercer leaned toward Thomas Carr. "If he stays on this case, we appeal everything." Carr closed his notebook. "He is not going to stay on this case." "You don't know that." "I know judges. More importantly, I know this judge has already spent the last 10 minutes explaining why his title should not matter. He is not about to make himself the center of the prosecution." Mercer glanced at the empty bench. The answer irritated him because it sounded like admiration. Behind the courtroom, Adrian sat in Chief Judge Evelyn Monroe's conference room with the administrative assignment order in front of him. Monroe had joined by video from another floor, so there would be a complete record of the conflict review. A court attorney sat at the far end of the table. No prosecutor was present. No defense lawyer was present. The question was narrow. Could Adrian continue without creating a reasonable appearance that the proceeding belonged to him personally? He already knew his answer. "I want it reassigned," he said. Monroe watched him for a moment. "Because you think you cannot be fair?" "No." "Then say the real reason." Adrian looked at the papers. "Because fairness is not only what I believe I can do, it is what everyone in that courtroom can reasonably trust they are seeing." The court attorney wrote something down. Monroe nodded once. "That is the right distinction." Adrian rested his hands on the table. "I do not want Mercer to leave today believing he defeated me with emotion." Monroe's expression softened, but only slightly. "There it is." He looked up. "The part of you that still wants the last word." Adrian did not answer. Monroe continued. "You had no control over what happened on Larkspur Avenue. Since then you have controlled every detail you could control. The documentation, the copies, the timing, the disclosure. That discipline helped expose something real. But discipline can become another way of refusing to let go." Adrian leaned back. His mother had told him almost the same thing without using any legal language at all. "Do not become like the people who disappoint you." He exhaled. "Reassign it." The random reassignment system selected Judge Naomi Feld, a federal judge with 16 years on the bench and no connection to Adrian, Harborcrest, Mercer, Doyle, or the internal investigation. She accepted the case that morning. At 9:54, Adrian returned to courtroom 7. Everyone stood again. This time Mercer looked directly at him. Adrian took his seat only long enough to make the record. Following review of the disclosure and the parties' motions, this matter is reassigned effective immediately to the Honorable Naomi Feld. No substantive ruling has been made by this court. The case will proceed on Judge Feld's calendar. Carr rose. "Thank you, Your Honor." Adrian nodded. Then he looked toward both defendants, not as a victim, not as an adversary, simply as the judge who had been assigned for 9 uncomfortable minutes and had decided that the integrity of the process mattered more than the satisfaction of remaining in the chair. "This court is adjourned." The gavel came down once. Mercer watched him leave. For a few seconds, relief moved across his face. Carr noticed. "Do not misunderstand what just happened," he said quietly. Mercer frowned. He stepped aside. "Yes. So we got what we asked for." Carr gathered his papers. "No. You got a judge with no personal connection to you, while the government kept every piece of evidence. That is not a victory. That is a cleaner courtroom. In the hallway, Adrian almost reached the private elevator before he heard someone call his name. Judge Villanueva. He turned. Min Tran stood near the wall, holding the reflective jacket he had worn to the courthouse. Sophia Reyes stood beside him. They both looked uncertain about approaching. Adrian walked toward them. Min spoke first. You gave up the case? It was reassigned. Because of what happened to you? Yes. Sophia looked toward the courtroom doors. Does that make it weaker? No. She studied him. You're sure? Adrian thought about how easily he could have given them a comforting answer, built from confidence instead of fact. The evidence will have to stand without me controlling the room, he said. That may make the process stronger. Min nodded slowly, then he asked, Will you testify? If I am called. You're okay with that? Adrian almost said yes automatically. Instead, he told the truth. I don't know yet. The answer seemed to surprise all three of them. For the rest of that day, Adrian returned to his own docket. A scheduling dispute waited on his desk. Two attorneys argued over 14 days in a discovery calendar as if civilization depended on it. A family-owned company needed a hearing on a contract. A clerk had questions about an order. Ordinary work. Adrian welcomed it. By late afternoon, Rachel Kim sent notice through formal channels that the government intended to call him as a fact witness if the case reached trial. He read the notice once, then again. His role had changed. On Larkspur Avenue, he had been the person being questioned. For 9 minutes that morning, he had been the judge above the courtroom. Soon, if the case continued, he would sit at witness level and answer someone else's questions. The idea unsettled him more than he expected. At dinner, Lilia listened while he explained the reassignment. You are disappointed, she said. I'm relieved. That was not what I said. Adrian smiled despite himself. A little. Because you wanted to be the one who finished it. He nodded. Lilia placed a bowl of rice between them. Your father used to fix televisions people had already tried to. Repair themselves. They would bring him a box full of loose screws and say, I almost had it. He would get so angry. Adrian laughed. Everything becomes a story about Dad's repair shop. Because your father understood screws, she sat down. And people. Then her expression turned serious. Maybe finishing this does not mean being the person who gives the final answer. Adrian looked at the empty place on his wrist. For most of his career, strength had meant preparation. Precision. Knowing the record better than anyone in the room. Now he was beginning to understand another kind. The strength to let evidence speak without arranging himself at the center of it. 6 weeks later, United States versus Cole Mercer and Evan Doyle was called for trial in Judge Naomi Feld's courtroom. Adrian entered through the public doors. He was not wearing a robe. He carried no judicial folder. He took a seat on a wooden bench outside with every other witness and waited for someone to call. His name. Judge Naomi Feld began the trial with a sentence Rachel Kim would remember long after the case ended. This courtroom is not here to decide whether anyone is important, she told the jury. It is here to decide what happened. Adrian heard the sentence from the witness room through a small monitor carrying the public audio feed. He sat beside a table with a paper cup of coffee and the subpoena folded inside his jacket pocket. He could not see the jury. He could not see Mercer. For the first time since the investigation began, he could not even see the evidence as it was introduced. The separation was deliberate. Witnesses would testify from memory and records, not from watching one another. Adrian found the restrictions strangely calming. He had spent most of his professional life believing that seeing more information created better judgment. That morning, being denied the full picture forced him to trust something else. Procedure. He could not correct a question, clarify a witness, or predict which exhibit would matter most. Someone else would decide what the jury heard and how the law applied. The helplessness was uncomfortable, but it was also clean. For once, Adrian did not have to be responsible for the room. He only had to be truthful when his turn came. Inside the courtroom, Rachel Kim stood before the jury without dramatic gestures. This case began with one street contact, she said. But it does not depend on one street contact, one witness, or one recording. She placed a photograph of the spiral notebook on the display screen. It depends on records that repeat. The first witness was Lieutenant Marisol Vega. Vega explained how Adrian's complaint had arrived, what records she requested, and what discrepancies appeared before anyone knew how large the investigation would become. Mercer's report said no search occurred. The recording captured a search. The report said no property was taken. Exterior video showed Mercer removing an object from Adrian's wrist. Doyle's camera registered a manual privacy activation. At the same moment, Adrian saw the indicator light disappear. Then Vega explained the historical audit. 17 unusual camera interruptions, repeated language in reports, a notebook containing initials and amounts, a garage cabinet containing objects later connected to multiple people named in those records. Thomas Carr rose for cross-examination. You began this deeper audit after discovering the complainant was a federal judge. Correct? Vega did not hurry. No. You learned his occupation during the intake interview. Yes. And then you expanded the case. I expanded the case after his recording contradicted Sergeant Mercer's written report, and the camera records showed additional unexplained interruptions. Carr walked slowly toward the lectern. But you understood immediately that a complaint from a federal judge would receive attention. Vega looked directly at him. I understood immediately that a recording showing an officer say one thing while his official report said another deserved attention. The courtroom remained quiet. Carr changed direction. The next witness was Min Tran. He wore a dark blue shirt and no tie. He kept both hands on the witness rail as if steadying himself against something invisible. Kim asked about the delivery route, the late stop, the envelope, and the missing $380. Min answered simply. Then Kim asked what he did the following morning. I went to the station. Why? To tell them. Were you given a complaint number? No. What were you told? That maybe I counted wrong. Kim displayed the photograph of Mercer's notebook. MT 380. Min looked at it for several seconds. What does that amount mean to you? She asked. It is what I said was missing. Carr's cross-examination lasted only 9 minutes. He suggested Min could not prove exactly when the money disappeared. Min agreed. He suggested Mercer had never been seen holding those specific bills. Min agreed. Then Carr asked, So your belief is based partly on what you learned later? Min shook his head. No. My belief is why I went to the station the next morning. What I learned later is that I was not the only one. Carr paused. That answer stayed with the jury. Sophia Reyes testified after lunch. Her story was different in details and almost identical in shape. A business van, a cash pouch, $200, a stop report that described nothing unusual, a notebook entry reading SR 200. She had never filed a complaint. Kim asked why. Sophia looked toward the jury. I had customers waiting, employees waiting for paychecks. $200 mattered, but losing another day trying to prove something I could not prove felt like losing twice. No one in the courtroom moved. Kim let the answer remain without decorating it. The technical witnesses came next. A body camera administrator explained privacy mode and metadata. A forensic analyst described the timing correlations. The accounting office owner authenticated the exterior video from Larkspur Avenue. The evidence custodian authenticated the objects recovered from Mercer's garage. Each testimony was small. Together, the pieces became difficult to separate. The defense tried to do exactly that. Carr argued that the notebook could have been a memory aid. The objects could have been unclaimed property. Cash amounts could be coincidences. Doyle could be shifting blame. Witnesses could have reconstructed memories after speaking with investigators. Judge Feld repeatedly reminded the jury that attorneys' questions were not evidence. On the third morning, the prosecution called Daniel Cho, whose wireless earbuds had been found in the garage cabinet, with a serial number matching his purchase receipt. Daniel did not remember every word Mercer had said during the stop. He remembered something more ordinary. He had been on his way home after closing a restaurant. He was tired. He wanted to leave. When the stop ended, his earbuds were gone. He decided buying another pair would cost less time than making a complaint. Rachel Kim asked him one final question. What did you think would happen if you complained? Daniel looked down. Nothing. From the witness room, Adrian heard that one word through the monitor. Nothing. That was what had protected the pattern. Not brilliance, not complexity, not some impossible scheme. The expectation that ordinary inconvenience would eventually defeat ordinary people. At 2:16 that afternoon, a court officer opened the witness room door. Judge Villanueva. Adrian stood. The officer corrected himself gently. Mr. Villanueva, they're ready for you. Adrian almost smiled. Thank you. He followed her down the corridor. Outside the courtroom doors, he paused for half a second. 6 weeks earlier, he had entered that building through a private passage, wearing a robe, while Mercer stared up at him. Today he would enter through the same door used by every witness. No elevation, no gavel, no control over the next question. Adrian opened the door and walked inside. The courtroom looked smaller from the witness stand. Adrian had spent years looking at rooms like this from above. From the bench he could see everyone at once. Counsel tables, jury box, gallery, clerk, witness. From the witness chair, the room narrowed. There was the microphone. Rachel Kim, Thomas Carr, 12 jurors watching his face, and, several yards away, Cole Mercer. Adrian raised his right hand and took the oath. Kim approached the lectern. Please state your name for the record. Adrian Ramon Villanueva. What is your occupation? I am a United States District Judge. Several jurors had already learned that during jury selection. None reacted visibly. Kim did not linger on the title. On the evening described in the indictment, were you working? No. How were you dressed? Jeans, running shoes, and a grey hoodie. Where were you coming from? My mother's house. What was in your backpack? A tablet, paperwork, leftover food, an envelope containing $640 my mother had asked me to deposit, and personal items. Then she took him through the encounter, one question at a time. Adrian answered the way he had answered Lieutenant Vega months earlier. When he remembered exact language, he said so. When he did not, he said he did not. When Kim asked why he remembered the body camera light turning off at approximately 9:23, he explained that he had looked toward it after requesting a property receipt. Did you tell Sergeant Mercer that you were a federal judge? No. Why not? Carr stood. Objection. Relevance. Judge Feld considered it. Overruled. Limited purpose. The witness may answer regarding his conduct during the encounter. Adrian looked toward the jury. Because my job should not have changed what rules applied to me on a sidewalk. Kim paused. Were you angry? Yes. The answer was immediate. Carr looked up from his notes. Kim continued. About the cash? Partly. About the watch? Yes. Why? It belonged to my father. A photograph of the Seiko appeared on the screen. Adrian had seen the evidence photograph before. Still, the sight of the worn band against a measurement grid tightened something in his chest. Kim asked him to identify it. He did. She zoomed in on the engraving. Remember where you came from? What did that mean? She asked. Adrian hesitated. My father gave me the watch before I became a judge. He did not care much about titles. He cared whether people remained useful and decent after receiving them. Carr rose again. Objection to narrative. Sustained, Judge Feld said. Adrian nodded. Kim moved on. She played 17 seconds of the backpack recording. Mercer's voice asked about the watch. Adrian's voice requested a receipt. Then Doyle's body camera light disappeared in the synchronized exterior video. No one needed an explanation for the timing. Kim ended with a simple question. Did you authorize Sergeant Mercer to keep your cash or your watch for personal use? No. Did you receive a property? Receipt? No. No further questions. Thomas Carr stood. His cross-examination began politely. Judge Villanueva, you are highly trained in observing testimony and preserving records, correct? I am trained in legal analysis. And you understood almost immediately That documentation could become important? Yes. You created a memorandum that same night? Yes. You preserved recordings in multiple locations? Yes. You contacted the chief judge of your court? Yes. To disclose what had occurred and avoid using my office improperly? Carr shifted. You were angry enough to stay awake much of the night. I was awake much of the night. That was not my question. Adrian looked at him. Yes, I was angry. Carr walked closer to the jury box. And you wanted Sergeant Mercer held accountable. I wanted the complaint investigated. You wanted your father's watch back. Yes. You wanted the officers punished. Adrian paused. That was the question Carr had been building toward. A less careful answer could make every action after Larkspur Avenue sound like retaliation. Adrian could feel Mercer watching him. I wanted the evidence followed wherever it led, he said. Carr turned quickly. That is a judge's answer. No, Adrian replied. It is the answer I gave before anyone investigating the complaint knew the full pattern. Carr's mouth tightened. He tried another direction. Your status brought resources to this investigation that Mr. Tran did not receive when he first complained, correct? The courtroom changed. The question was dangerous for both sides because it was partly true. Adrian did not avoid it. My status may have made people more cautious after they learned it. Kim watched him closely. Carr nodded. Exactly. Adrian continued before Carr could move on. But the first evidence Lieutenant Vega acted on was a recording and a false report. And the most important evidence after that came from people whose complaints should have mattered the first time. Carr objected. Judge Feld sustained the objection and instructed the jury to consider only the factual portion responsive to the question. But the sentence had already been heard. Carr returned to his table. No further questions. Adrian stepped down. He did not look at Mercer as he passed the defense table. Outside, Lilia waited on a hallway bench. She had not been allowed inside during his testimony because she might be called later to authenticate the cash amount and watch history. How was it? She asked. Uncomfortable. Good. He looked at her. She smiled. You judges make other people answer questions all day. Adrian laughed for the first time that afternoon. The prosecution's final major witness was Evan Doyle. Doyle had entered a cooperation agreement that required truthful testimony and left his sentence entirely to Judge Feld. The jury was told that clearly. Kim did not present him as a hero. She presented him as a participant who finally stopped protecting the pattern. Doyle admitted deactivating cameras. He admitted remaining silent while Mercer kept property. He admitted accepting small items on 2 occasions and failing to correct false reports. Then Kim asked how Mercer chose which encounters to exploit. Doyle stared at his hands. He liked people who looked like they did not have time to fight. What does that mean? Delivery drivers, contractors, people finishing shifts, people carrying work bags. He said the loss had to be smaller than the hassle. Kim let the words settle. The hassle of what? Complaining. Carr's cross-examination attacked Doyle's agreement, his memory, and his motive to reduce his own consequences. Doyle agreed that he had reasons to cooperate. Then Carr asked, So why should this jury believe you now? Doyle looked toward the notebook displayed on the evidence table. They shouldn't because I say so, he answered. They should compare what I say to what he wrote down. By late afternoon, both sides rested. Judge Feld instructed the jury. Rachel Kim gave a closing argument built almost entirely from repetition. Dates, initials, amounts, camera gaps, objects, reports saying nothing happened. Carr argued reasonable doubt and warned the jury not to turn a flawed officer into the explanation for every missing item anyone remembered. Then the jury left to deliberate. Adrian sat in the public hallway beside Min, Sophia, Daniel, and his mother. No robe, no special entrance, nothing left to prepare. For a man who had built his life around preparation, waiting was its own final lesson. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and 11 minutes. Adrian knew the exact time because everyone around him kept pretending not to watch the clock. Min Tran left twice to take work calls. Sophia Reyes answered messages from employees. Daniel Cho bought vending machine crackers and offered them to everyone. Lilia finished a crossword puzzle, started another, and complained that modern puzzles used too many abbreviations. Adrian tried to read. He made it through the same page 4 times. At 4:38, a courtroom deputy opened the hallway door. "We have a verdict." The group stood almost together. Adrian's heart accelerated in a way he had experienced many times from the bench, but never from the gallery. He and Lilia entered last. Mercer was already seated beside Carr. Doyle sat at the other table with his attorney. Judge Feld returned to the bench. The jury entered. No one looked at Mercer. The foreperson held a folder containing the verdict form. Judge Feld asked the clerk to read the findings. The counts were technical in language and simple in effect. On the charges tied to falsified records and unlawful property conversion, guilty. On the obstruction-related counts, supported by deliberate camera deactivation and false reporting, guilty on most counts. On 2 narrower counts where the evidence did not establish Mercer's personal involvement, beyond a reasonable doubt, not guilty. Rachel Kim wrote each result without reacting. Thomas Carr did the same. Adrian noticed that. The verdict was not total. That mattered to him. A jury had not simply decided Mercer was a bad man and accepted everything attached to his name. They had separated strong counts from weaker ones. The process had done what Adrian had wanted from the beginning. It had discriminated between evidence, not between people. Doyle's verdict followed under the terms of his separate plea and cooperation arrangement. His admitted conduct remained part of the record, but his decision to provide evidence would be considered later at sentencing. Mercer did not turn toward the gallery. He stared at the table. Judge Feld thanked the jurors. Then she did something Adrian appreciated more than any dramatic statement she might have made. She said nothing about Adrian's title, nothing about hoodies, nothing about poetic justice. She discussed the law, the verdict, and the next procedural dates. The courtroom ended the way real courtrooms often did, with calendars, instructions, paperwork, and consequences arriving through ordinary sentences spoken in an even voice. Outside, reporters waited behind a barrier. Adrian had expected them. The headline had become obvious the moment his identity entered the public record. Federal judge was first complainant in officer property case. Judge in hoodie helped expose pattern. Some reporters called it an unbelievable reversal. Others called it a hidden identity story. Adrian disliked both descriptions. He walked past the microphones with Lilia beside him. One reporter called, "Judge Villanueva, how does it feel to see the officers convicted?" Adrian stopped. His court's communications policy allowed only a narrow statement because he had been a witness and not the presiding judge. He turned. "The verdict belongs to the jury," he said. "The important fact is that multiple people were heard." Then he left. Min watched from several feet away. Later that evening he sent Adrian a message through Lieutenant Vega because they had never exchanged personal numbers. "Thank you for saying multiple people." Adrian read it twice. That message meant more than the headlines. Sentencing occurred 7 weeks later. By then, the Internal Department Review had identified 12 people eligible for restitution or return of recovered property. Some items could be matched by serial number, some by photographs. Others could not be proved with enough certainty and were handled through a separate compensation process. Judge Feld sentenced Mercer after hearing from several affected people. Min spoke for 3 minutes. He did not ask for the maximum punishment. He talked about trust. He explained how, after his complaint had been dismissed, he photographed his delivery envelopes every night because he no longer trusted that being accurate would protect him from being doubted. Sophia spoke about time. $200 was not small to me, she said. But the bigger loss was learning that asking for help could cost more than staying quiet. Daniel spoke about inconvenience becoming a shield for wrongdoing. Adrian did not speak. He had submitted the factual victim statement requested by the court, but he declined to recommend a sentence. That decision surprised Rachel Kim. "You are allowed to have a view," she told him before the hearing. "I do." And Judge Feld does not need me to borrow the bench from the gallery." Kim smiled. That may be the most judicial thing you have said since recusing. Adrian laughed. Judge Feld imposed a substantial federal sentence on Mercer, followed by supervised release, restitution, and permanent separation from law enforcement service. She emphasized that the sentence reflected repeated misuse of public authority and deliberate falsification, not the identity of any single complainant. Doyle received a significantly lesser sentence because of his cooperation, but Judge Feld rejected the idea that following a supervisor erased responsibility. You had fewer choices than Sergeant Mercer, she told him. But fewer is not the same as none. Doyle lowered his head. The department formally terminated both men after the criminal findings became final under its employment procedures. Captain Price ordered every complaint associated with the camera gap audit reopened. 2 supervisors received discipline for failing to investigate earlier warning signs. Professional Standards changed its intake rules, so any allegation involving missing property automatically generated a numbered complaint. Even if the person did not have documents proving ownership at the first contact, body camera privacy activations now required a coded reason and automated supervisory review. Evidence receipts became digital and immediate. None of the reforms sounded dramatic. Adrian liked that. Real improvement often looked boring on paper: a required field, a receipt, a second reviewer, a record that could not quietly disappear. 3 days after sentencing, Lieutenant Vega called Adrian. I have something that can finally leave evidence, she said. He knew before she told him. At 4:15 that afternoon, Adrian entered the Professional Standards building, where he had first sat beneath fluorescent lights with a manila envelope on his lap. The same chairs lined the wall. The same number dispenser stood near the door. Vega met him at the counter carrying a clear property pouch. Inside was the Seiko. Its band had been cleaned but not polished. The scratches remained. Adrian was grateful for that. Vega slid the release form toward him. Sign here. He signed. She opened the pouch and placed the watch in his palm. For several seconds, neither spoke. The object felt lighter than Adrian remembered, or perhaps everything attached to it had become heavier. He turned it over. Remember where you came from. Vega watched him. You were right about one thing, she said. What? The complaint should have looked the same whether you were a judge or not. Adrian closed his fingers around the watch. I was wrong about something too. What? I thought documenting everything would let me control what happened next. Vega smiled faintly. And did it? No. He fastened the Seiko around his wrist. It just gave the truth somewhere to start. 3 months later, Adrian wore the grey hoodie again. Not because he was making a statement. That was important to him. He wore it because the morning was cold. The sweatshirt was comfortable, and his mother had once again asked him to walk from her house after Sunday dinner, carrying more food than one person needed. The Seiko rested against his left wrist. Harbour Crest looked almost exactly as it had the night everything began: renovated homes, clean sidewalks, wind pushing leaves along the curb. A patrol car approached from behind. Adrian heard the tires before he saw the lights reflected in a window. For half a second, his body remembered before his mind did. His shoulders tightened. He slowed. Then the patrol car continued past. The officer behind the wheel lifted one hand in a simple wave. Adrian returned it. Nothing else happened. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment after the vehicle disappeared. Months earlier, he had believed his goal was to reach that point unchanged. Same street, same hoodie, same route. As if strength meant proving that an experience had altered nothing. He no longer believed that. People were changed by what happened to them. The question was what they built from the change. Adrian had become less certain that preparation could solve everything, more willing to let other people carry part of the work, less interested in being the smartest person in a room, more interested in whether the quietest person had been heard. Those changes followed him onto the bench. He listened longer before deciding what a confused answer meant, and asked to hear people's own words before accepting someone else's summary. The law had not changed. The room had, Chief Judge Monroe noticed. You wait longer now, she told him one afternoon. Is that criticism? I have not decided. Adrian smiled. Monroe sat in the chair across from his desk. The commission issued its final report this morning. He had known it was coming. The independent review found that professional standards had failed to create formal records for several earlier complaints and informal contacts. The report did not claim everyone involved had acted maliciously. In some cases, staff had followed weak policies exactly as written. That finding bothered Adrian more than a simple villain would have. Bad systems did not always announce themselves through bad people. Sometimes they survived because ordinary people followed routines without asking what those routines allowed to disappear. The department adopted the recommended changes. Every property dispute during an officer contact would receive a traceable case number. Camera interruptions would generate automated review. Random audits would compare officer notes against GPS and recording metadata. A civilian advisory group would meet quarterly with professional standards. Min Tran accepted one of the seats. Sophia Reyes accepted another. When Vega told Adrian, he laughed. Min hates meetings. He said the same thing. Then why did he agree? Because he said people like him usually skip meetings, and apparently that is exactly why he should be there. Adrian liked that answer. He never joined the advisory group. He never asked to. Monroe had been right months earlier. He was not the spokesperson for everyone whose property had been taken. He did not need to turn their experiences into an extension of his own. Instead, he returned to his docket. He worked. He ran. He visited Lilia every Sunday unless court travel interfered. And he wore his father's watch almost every day. One evening, Lilia asked him to help clean the cedar cabinet where she had stored Ramon's old business records. They sat on the living room floor surrounded by folders, receipts, photographs, and instruction manuals for electronics nobody had owned in 20 years. Lilia held up an invoice from 1997. Your father charged $12 to fix this radio. $12. He was terrible at pricing. He was terrible at saying no. Adrian found the photograph of Ramon behind the Villanueva electronics counter. The Seiko was visible on his wrist. For a while, Adrian simply looked at it. Lilia noticed. You know what he would say about all this? Adrian smiled. That I should have worn a cheaper watch. No. That the courthouse coffee is bad. Also true. She took the photograph from him. He would ask what happened to the other people. Adrian's smile faded into something gentler. Most got their property back or restitution. The old complaints were reopened. Min and Sophia are on the advisory group. Lilia nodded. Then he would say good. That's it. That was your father. One word when 20 would do. Adrian laughed. Then Lilia touched the watch. Do you understand the engraving differently now? He looked at the 4 words. Remember where you came from. For years, Adrian had understood them as a warning against pride. Do not forget Daly City. Do not forget the repair shop. Do not forget the parents who arrived with 2 suitcases. Do not become impressed by your own name on a door. All of that was still true. But now, the words meant something else. 2. Remember what the world looks like when nobody knows your title. Remember the plastic chair beneath fluorescent lights. Remember the delivery driver who had already complained once. Remember the business owner who decided her time was too expensive to lose twice. Remember that dignity should never depend on whether someone eventually discovers you are important. Adrian closed the folder and sat back against the sofa. I think I do, he said. Lilia waited. He continued. I used to think power was being able to make the final decision. You are a judge. That is an understandable occupational problem. He smiled. Now I think power is also knowing when the decision should not belong to you. Lilia considered that. Better. Just better. Do not get excited. They continued sorting papers until nearly 10. When Adrian left, Lilia packed Pansit into a container and ignored his protest that he still had food from Sunday. Some things did not need reform. Outside, the air had turned cold. Adrian pulled up the hood of his grey sweatshirt and started toward his car. The Seiko caught the porch light. He thought about the first night on Larkspur Avenue and how badly Mercer had misunderstood him. For a long time, Adrian had believed the lesson was that Mercer chose the wrong man. That was not the lesson. If Mercer had chosen Min, Sophia, Daniel, or someone whose name never appeared on a courthouse wall, it still would have been wrong. The surprise was never that the man in the hoodie had power. The failure was believing he needed power before he deserved fairness. Adrian reached his car and looked once toward his mother's window. Lilia was still there, waving because she always waited until he drove away. He lifted his hand. Then he looked at his father's watch. Time had not erased what happened. It had revealed what came after. A complaint that was recorded. A pattern that was finally seen. People who had been reduced to initials becoming names again. A judge learning that justice was not strongest when it gave him control, but when it worked without needing his title at all. Adrian opened the car door. Before getting in, he read the engraving one last time under the porch light. Remember where you came from. He smiled. Then he drove home through the same city, wearing the same watch, carrying the same food, and understanding something his father had tried to teach him years before. A person does not become worthy when the world discovers who they are. They were worthy before anyone asked, and the measure of a fair system is whether it remembers that when nobody important is watching. Fim da narrativa.